Good evening, everyone, and welcome to IKG's Wisdom Wednesday for November. I am the IKG coordinator and your host, Ajwa, and we are so happy that you're able to join us this evening. So, as we get started, just want to go over a few housekeeping items. So, as many of you all who are familiar with us know, Wisdom Wednesday is a monthly lecture series that we hold. We normally hold them here in Washington, D.C., but due to COVID, we have been holding them virtually, which has allowed us a great opportunity to be able to reach people all across the world. So as we come in, we ask people to let us know where you're from. So in the chat, please feel free to type in where you're hailing from. And we will like to shout out those different cities. Also, throughout the evening, if you have a question for our host, we ask that you type that question in the Q&A box. So the Q&A box are for all questions, and our chat box is for us to engage with each other in the attendee, in the audience. So just to start off, just want to shout out Brother Harusa coming in from Adelphi, Maryland. We have Texas in the house, DC, of course. Barbados, we have Barbados here, New Jersey, Bowie, Maryland, Portland, Oregon, Chesterville, Virginia, Montana, Sykeston, Montana, Brooklyn, New York, Portland, Oregon again, New York, the UK, London is checking in. More folks from New Jersey and New York. All right, Georgia, you got Savannah, Georgia. And Chicago, wonderful Chicago. Let's see. Silver Springs, Staten Island, Pittsburgh, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, Canada. So we're all over the world today. Charlotte, Florida, Philadelphia, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Hyattsville, Maryland, Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Another person from Canada, San Diego, Tulsa's in the house, another Tulsa, Oklahoma. Norfolk, Virginia. I'm just calling these out because we're just really literally all over the world today. So this is awesome. Pasadena, California, Shreveport, Louisiana, Greenbelt, Maryland. Thank you all for coming and sharing your energy and lending your time with us this evening. We are so excited and happy to have you. And we are certain that you will be enlightened with this evening's program. This evening, we are delighted to present Claudette Joy Spence. In her presentation, she states that it is designed to acknowledge, remember, and affirm the liberating spirits of our African ancestors who worked in the countries of the African continent and in the diaspora. She states that tonight she will affirm, and we will affirm together, our ancestors, some of whom were well known on the international stage, as well as others who were lesser known or even unknown. The connection among them is that they worked for the liberation of their people from the oppressive energies of the European colonizers. By speaking of these ancestors, our presenter hopes to highlight the interconnectedness of the desire and the work of our fore-parents, to encourage us and our children to continue to build on the resist, fight, and build legacies of our ancestors, and to reclaim the Pan-African connection among our ancestors' will for freedom. It is Claudette Joy Spence's hope to expand our paradigm of liberation so that we can discern creative ways in which each of us brings our talents to the fight for liberation of Africans at home and abroad. The ancestors who will be mentioned in this presentation are listed in 366 Days of Liberation, written by our presenter, Claudette Joy Spence. There are more than 300 individuals listed in this book, and each has one page designated to introduce readers to these liberators. This presentation will select several ancestors who are mentioned along with group experiences that our ancestors enacted in their efforts to liberate their people. This evening, we will examine liberation through the eyes and energies of the more traditional battlefield warrior, and also through the eyes of liberators, such as scholars, artists, lawyers, and community organizers. Our speaker, Claudette Joy Spence, earned a BA degree in political science and communications from Queens College and an MSc degree in mass communications from Brooklyn College. She served as an adjunct assistant professor at St. John's University, New York, teaching in the School of Professional Studies and the School of Liberal Arts. Published since 2005, Claudette Joy is the author of 5 books: 366 Days of Liberation, Not My Mother's Daughter, Sunday Afternoon Energy, Garden of Wisdom and Faith, and the most popular, Nurturing the Garden of Joy, provocative essays on relationships. Combining her creativity, entrepreneurial energies, and a desire to serve her community, Claudette Joy has created C Solutions. It is a business entity that provides publishing services for emerging authors, guidance for strengthening public speaking skills and confidence, enhancing interpersonal skills to expand one's influence through gentle, loving, and peace-filled communications in the workplace, at home, or in community organizations. We are very delighted to have Ms. Claudette Joy Spence with us this evening. She will now be coming on screen, joining us. Thank you. And I will turn it over to you. I'll ask that you come off mute. And it is all yours. Oh, you're back on mute. Claudette, you're back on mute. There we go.
Okay. Sister Ajua, thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. It makes me sound as if I've lived for a long, long time, all those things that you said that I've done. But thank you. And I want to thank everyone who is here with us this evening for this presentation. Just give me a minute to get my screen up. I'm working on it. I'm pressing the button and it's not yet giving. There we go. There we go. Now let me go back. And so my presentation this evening is titled Ancestral Courage. I'm glad that you are here. As Sister Ajua said, I present a communications model that help us to talk with each other and understand each other with a little more gentility and compassion. And so I would encourage you that if you think you even have a little itsy bitsy need for that in your life, in your families, in the workplace, please reach out to me so that we can figure some way to make this a more satisfying relationship for you. In terms of introducing what I do, I have some photographs here. Here I am presenting at a professional development workshop for some teachers in St. Anne's in Jamaica. Here is the group of teachers hard at work. Here we have the principal and the vice principal who are also involved in that professional development session. Here is a group that I was a lead organizer for to come together. When President-elect Barack Obama was coming into office, he put out a call for communities to be engaged in conversations to come up with suggestions about influencing the Affordable Care Act. And this group in Corona, through my home church, Corona Congregational Church did just that. Here is a photograph of all of us from Corona Congregational Church, where Reverend Reginald Brantley is our pastor. Here I am with one of my sisters, Bea, celebrating African Heritage Month. Here I am with some of my church sisters. And in 2019, I wrote a piece titled Race of the Butterfly. It was a project sponsored by Newtown Literary and the Lewis Latimer House Museum. Many of us may be familiar with Lewis Latimer. He, extraordinary, rarely gifted scientist, and who is credited with the creation of the filament for the light bulb. So at his house museum, we had a cohort of writers writing about race and immigration. And here are some of my friends who came out to hear me to read that evening. Here I am also reading at the readathon for the Better Jamaica. A Better Jamaica is an organization that works to improve the quality of life for African people in the Queens, Southeast Queens neighborhood. And this particular readathon was to encourage and raise funds for improving the literacy of our young people. Here I am with a group of volunteers that prepare meals and serve them in a dining setting, usually in a church, for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Here I am supporting the Jamaica bobsled team. And here we are, the Dr. Edith Rock Writers Workshop that's sponsored by Siloam Presbyterian Church and the Center for Black Literature at Medgar Evers College. In this particular photo, we also have our instructor and I think 3 of Dr. Rock's children. Dr. Rock passed, I think it was in 2019. And so here on the Coney Island Broadwalk in New York, by the Atlantic Ocean, there's a tribute to the ancestors of the Middle Passage that happens every year. I think they're in their 30th year now. Brother Rasa Sajifu, you can see right here, is one of the organizers of this particular event. Here on the extreme right is Professor Emeritus Rupert Lewis, who is strong Garveyite, not only in principle, but in practice and in theory. He is one of those professors who's done quite a bit of writing on Garvey. Here is Ras Asajifu, he's an outstanding poet. He is so talented, along with Nandi Jacobs, who is also a writer and a playwright at a Caribbean cultural event in Brooklyn. Here I am a part of Division 432, the UNIA, that was in August of 2020. I was one of the keynote speakers at the event. I spoke about Garveyism and economics. Here I am with, at the time, President of 432, Sister Jasmine Pitter. I served on her team as the chair of the communications committee. And here in Brooklyn, we have a group photo when Dr. Anthony Browder came into Brooklyn to inform us, to educate us about the ASA restoration project. We were there to learn about the great work that he's doing and all of that information coming out of Egypt. So I thank you all for being here, taking us this far. I will be reading and sharing information from 366 Days of Liberation. Now, this is a project that the ancestors put on my heart to do. They put it on my heart once and I ignored it. They put it twice and I ignored it. And the third time I said, Claudette, you better wake up and do what they're telling you to do. So I've put it together and I'll be reading from it. I want to give thanks to God, to my ancestors, the IKG Wisdom Wednesday, certainly Dr. Anthony Browder, Sisters Atlantis Browder and Ajua. And while I am the author of the book, I had 24 contributors who also wrote about their family members who have transitioned. And Reginald Brantley is one of them, Sister Jasmine Pitter, and Brother Andrew P. Jackson, Seko Molifi Baku, he wrote the foreword to the book. And here's a list of all of the contributors who are in the book. And certainly, if you get a copy of it, you can spend as much time flipping through the pages to see what they wrote about their loved ones. Now, I'd like to set the stage and read from excerpts from one of the essays in the book. It's on October 31st. The book was really designed for us to read about one ancestor or one experience per day. So on October 31st, this section is titled The Rice Coast. Bruce Island in Sierra Leone, 20 miles up the Sierra Leone River and a few miles north of the capital, Freetown, was home to one of the most profitable slave trading operations in West Africa. Established in 1670 by English slave traders, it was the largest British slave castle on the Rice Coast, where tens of thousands of Africans were shipped to North America and the West Indies. The island was part of more than 60 slave trading forts on the West African coast. It was majorly operated by two companies, the Gambia Adventurers and the Royal African Company of England, from 1670 to 1728. It flourished during private management by a consortium of London firms from 1744 to 1807. Slave trading ceased on the island in 1808 after the slave trade was abolished. The selection of Africans from the Rice Coast, which stretches from Senegal right to Liberia through Bunce Island, was not random. Africans were particularly targeted on account of Beye Bure, Sierra Leone's greatest hero, who held off British control for months in 1898. South Carolina, which became one of the wealthiest states in North America with an economy based on rice cultivation, benefited the most from these enslaved Africans from the Rice Coast. Nearby Georgia also insisted on using slaves from this region. At the time, during slave auctions in Charlestown, now Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, and Georgia, slave selling advertisements specifically mentioned slaves from the Rice Coast or Bunce Island to assure buyers that they would get experienced hands. Buyers would then be willing to pay more for them. Rice cultivation in America increased as more and more African captives were shipped from Bunce Island to work on rice farms. And so I wanted just to set the context of Africans coming out of the African continent and coming into the West that we know called the diaspora. What I will be doing during our time together here this evening is that I will share a couple of pieces, maybe about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll take some time to answer the questions or comments that you have in the chat. We're looking at Brazil. I'm lifting up the name of Nganga Nzumbe, right? He was the first leader of the massive runaway settlement in Palmeiras in Brazil. He was an enslaved African who escaped bondage from a sugar plantation and rose to the highest authority within the kingdom of Palmeiras and earned the title of Nganga Zumba. He was the grandson of a king in the Congo, and he was captured by the Portuguese there and shipped out into the area that's Brazil. Now, I'm just taking a couple of pieces from the book, but it's one page. It's certainly not enough to expound on the individual's history and persona and all of that. There's a lot more work to be done, but you can read some more from the book. Here I have Zumba, the legend of the Palmeiras Quilombo, and its greatest leader, Zumba, are central to the history and modern day struggle of Brazilians who recognize their African ancestry. We know that Brazil has the largest amount of Africans outside of folks on the continent. All over Brazil, there are or have been hundreds of organizations and cultural groups named after this legendary leader, as well as a national holiday in recognition of Black consciousness, and also Brazil's first and only predominantly Black college. I want now to take a look at some other parts of the Caribbean. There was what in this piece is titled Johnny and Sambo in 1725. In Nevis, there was a slave conspiracy that was never really enacted. Now, it was leaked that the Africans were planning to execute the Europeans on the land. Somehow that information got to the Europeans and tried their best. They could not get anyone to say that, yes, there was a plot, although they executed quite a few people because of this conspiracy. And it raises a question, was there really a plot in Nevis? Or were there some Africans sitting around dreaming out loud that they wished that they would be free and what they could do to earn their freedom? We'll take a look at Montserrat. You know, I'm lifting up a couple of countries where we don't frequently hear about the Africans that were brought there during the slave trade, or the Africans who were enslaved there. So here we have the Montserrat slave revolt, 1968. They had hoped to surprise the Irish planters with this island-wide attack, but it was unsuccessful. 9 Africans were hanged as a result of that. Here we have the Bussa Rebellion in Barbados. And I think someone joined in who said that they are from Barbados. And I'd love to hear your take on this, or if there are additional rebellions in Barbados that I haven't lifted up. But this one is known to be the largest slave revolt in Barbadian history. And it takes the name from the enslaved African-born leader who led the rebellion. It is believed that Bussa was taken out of Nigeria. Now, the Bussa rebellion in Barbados was defeated by the British Armed Forces. One of the things that we may be aware of, that our ancestors, even though they were outnumbered and out-armed, that did not stop them from fighting. And there's a level of energy and respect I think we have to give to them. You know, we look at the Maroons, for example, in Jamaica. I mean, they didn't have the guns and the ammunition that the British, Spanish, or the British army did, but that did not stop them from taking up the fight. And it makes me beg the question of us today. What, if anything, is stopping us from taking up the fight in a different way? Okay, so now I want to look at this ancestor, freedom fighter by the name of Dudley Laws, who lived from 1934 to 2011. It says in 1988, after a number of Black men were shot and killed in confrontations with Toronto area police, Laws, Charles Roach, Sharona Hall, and Lennox Farrell co-founded Black Action Defense Committee, and they pushed for independent police oversight to protect Black youth. I see in the chat that we have someone joining us from Canada. Maybe you will be able to give us some more information, not only on this group, but also some other freedom fighters who show up in different ways in Canada. Now, Laws by trade was a mechanic and a welder. He was born in Jamaica, emigrated to UK, and then to Canada. UK is on the line too, and so Mr. Dudley Laws is certainly representing three nations here today. Angela Braxton Herndon, born in 1913, transitioned in 1937, was born in Ohio, was a labor organizer, and he was arrested and convicted of insurrection after attempting to organize Black and white industrial workers in 1932 in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, as I was preparing this presentation today, I said, wow, I wrote this book, published this book in 2020. And the insurrection we had here in the United States was January 6, 2021. I said, I wondered what happened with this insurrection. As it turned out, his case reached the Supreme Court twice. And the court declared that the Georgia's insurrection law was unconstitutional because it violated First Amendment rights of speech and assembly. As a youth, Angela Braxton Herndon was introduced to the Communist Manifesto by white worker in the Unemployed Council. He was impressed with the promotion of labor reform, interracial cooperation, teachings on racial equality, and class conflict. It makes me want to ask you, the viewer, what principles or philosophy or ideology impresses you around labor reform, interracial cooperation, teachings on racial equality, and class conflict? Because those are some of the things that still carry on in our communities. The next ancestor is Cornelius Robinson Coffey, spelled C-O-F-F-E-Y, from 1902 to 1994. He was the first African-American to establish a non-university affiliated aeronautical school in the USA. He and his wife, Willa Brown Coffey, formed that school. Now, he was a recipient of a Federal Aviation Administration Award. And for those aviators or those of you who love to fly and like the details about flying, it says CO space FEY fix is a waypoint located on the Victor 7 airway over Lake Calumet that provides electronic course guidance to Chicago Midway Airport, runway 31 left. So the next time you go into Chicago Midway Airport, you may keep an eye out to see where our ancestors' mark has been made. And it makes me wonder, if he could do this, and he had such a passion for aviation, how could that be used to help in the liberation of our people? The next ancestor is Willis Boynard Wyatt, 1882 to 1945. He was born in Georgia, was a carpenter by trade, a farmer, a painter, electrician, a businessman, and a plumber. He also learned how to read blueprints, a gift passed down from his father. This gift came in handy when he founded the Mount Sinai Baptist Church, located in the Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. Pastor White uses carpentry skills to physically build several of the church pews where they can be seen today. In 2019, the church celebrated its 100th anniversary. As a businessman, he knew the importance of ownership. He bought burial plots for his children and his grandchildren. As I read this piece was submitted by one of the contributors, Phyllis Coachman. And you see here that, I think this was her grandfather, that he was a carpenter, a farmer, a painter, electrician, businessman, and a plumber. And I wonder if we are still teaching, or if there's a need even to teach our communities how to farm and how to build things from wood, how to be an electrician and to be a plumber. Just wondering. Another ancestor is Ahmed Timal from 1941 to 1971. He was a teacher, freedom fighter, and avid sportsman. They said his life was cut short when he reportedly jumped out of a window at the notorious John Vorster Square police station in Johannesburg, South Africa. He was arrested after being found in possession of banned African National Congress literature. His capture spawned a string of subsequent arrests, with many others being detained, brutally beaten, and tortured. Timal's family were given his body for burial, and after ritual Muslim washing rites, they reported his fingernails to have been removed, his neck broken, and his body covered in bruises. One freedom fighter. We're looking at Ahmed Kathrada, 1929 to 2017, a former South African politician, political prisoner, activist. He will be remembered for his involvement in the struggle against apartheid. He worked alongside Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and other publicly known greats to end racial discrimination in South Africa. He was an anti-war activist by age 12. And I know since the pandemic, we have seen more publicly images of our young people protesting and building and doing the work to end, the oppression and the injustices. But I wonder how many of us begin to take on activism at the age of 12. For those of you with children, how would you sit with guiding your 12-year-old to be an activist, or encouraging them if they wanted to be? Or maybe you were one at the age 12. Certainly if you were, we'd like to hear about you. Put it in the Q&A, please, and let's talk about that. This is A. Philip Randolph, an organizer. He was a socialist and a pacifist. He founded the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first successful Black trade union, and the Negro American Labor Council. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King referred to Randolph as the Dean of Negro Leaders. He was the son of a preacher, the youngest son of a preacher who was deeply committed to racial politics. So he was born in Florida. So you can see that some of these children are getting exposure to the injustices that prevail us and possibilities for how to resist and build. Well, this is the second part of A. Philip Randolph. It says, after the 1925 founding of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, Randolph succeeded in gaining recognition of the union from the Pullman Palace Car Company. When the union signed its first contract with the company, membership rose to nearly 15,000 people. He devoted his life to the achievement of both racial and economic equity, which I think is so very important in the systems in which we live, economic equity. Here is another sister, Omega Smart. This African-centered thinking began with my father's mother, Omega Smart, who was born in Grenada. And I'm quoting, this is a direct quote here. When I was about 5 years old, as I was having some oil down, breadfruit, with my grandmother, and she started talking about her father. He was a real African, she said. He never gave up our ways. And you are an African too. Don't forget that. We were born in Grenada, but we're not Grenadians. We are Africans. That is our home where we were stolen from, she taught me. In memory of those who took time to nurture my growth, I take a moment to give thanks. And this is a speaking of Bekwe Adejun, one of the 24 contributors to the work, that his grandmother was telling him that he was African. And, it makes me wonder how many of us are told by our parents or our grandparents that we are indeed African. even if we were not born on the African continent. If we're born here in the diaspora, are you a real African? Bekwe Ajun's grandmother told him that he was, and he believes it. Dorothy Irene Height, that's another of our ancestors. She was a civil rights and women's rights activist. She focused on the issues of African-American women, including unemployment among us, illiteracy, and she built voter awareness. She's credited as the first leader in the civil rights movement to recognize the inequality of women, of African-American women, and the problems that women, African-American women, were facing. I want to look at two women here, Irene Cohen and Lucretia Pam. Irene was one of 5 women who died during military combat in the fight for independence in Angola. The martyred group has a certain mythology. They are the only known women to have taken up arms and to have joined an otherwise all-male military detachment tasked with entering Angola, crossing both the Congos. And certainly, if you have additional information, anybody here has additional information about these women, Lucretia Palm and Irene Cohen, we'd love to get that information. Annually, they're eulogized on Angolan Women's Day in March. It says their short and tragic lives, or the way in which they died, are made emblematic of African feminism and national pride. Now, this is one of the songs that I heard Sister Ajua playing at the beginning of this presentation. It was something by Fela Ransom Kuti. You know, we're looking at the artist, the musician as an activist. And Fela certainly was one such. He paid a heavy price for it, but you know, when you believe that you're called to do something, you just have to do it. I had the privilege of seeing Fela perform in Accra in the 70s when I visited there with African Heritage Studies Association group. And musicians, you know? Yeah, he was repeatedly arrested and beaten for writing lyrics that questioned the Nigerian government. You know, he traveled, he went to England, and then he came into the US, and he was influenced by Black nationalism here in the US. And on his return to Nigeria, his music served as a rallying cry for the disenfranchised, critiquing the military government, making Fela a pop star, and thrust him into political life. Sadly, his mother, who also had been an activist, was brutally murdered because of her work and because of that of her sons. Here is another artist, Catherine Mary Dunham. She's a dancer. She was born in Illinois, choreographer and an author, educator, anthropologist, and a social activist. Now, one of the things we're noticing that no one person is any one thing. You know, we're multi-talented and multitasked to engage in using the gifts we've been given for the liberation of our people. And Sister Catherine Mary Dunham, 1909 to 2006, was no exception to that trend. Cheryl Barron, and I put Cheryl here because she comes out of the Caribbean too. She was a visual artist, dancer, singer, social and cultural activist, advocate. She started her studies in the land of her birth, Trinidad and Tobago. I had the privilege of videotaping Sister Cheryl Barron. She founded a group called Something Positive that provided education about the African presence in our culture in the diaspora. I had the opportunity to videotape one of her presentations when she was performing at the Langston Hughes Community Center and Library in Corona. That was on VHS. I was an undergraduate student at the time, and I'm hoping they still have it available to transfer to the latest modem. Miriam Speed, another liberator. She was born in Jamaica, and she founded a school in Kingston called Merle Grove High School. And the school was for girls, and she founded it to give opportunities to families who were not able to provide high school education for their daughters. And so it makes me wonder, those among us who have the gifts, whether it's the financial gifts or the educator gift, how do we help our children? There's much talk about our schools are not teaching the curriculum for children. But I know certainly in New York that we have access to the school board. And that if you have a student, if you have a child who's a student in the school, you can go in and try to shape what the curriculum looks like and what it is you'd like your children to learn. Following in the step of Miriam Speed, I think that would be a good thing. Now here we're looking at Mamie Leona Torpio de Mena, also known as Madame de Mena. She spoke Spanish. She was fluent in Spanish. And she was an international organizer for the Universal Negro Improvement Association and Communities, and African Communities League. She, international organizer, and she was a fourth assistant president general. She was born in Nicaragua, and she married a Jamaican, and together, but their joint mutual idealism and activism brought them together to work for the upliftment of their people. And it begs the question, if we are to organize among ourselves, what kind of languages do we need to know? What kind of languages are we studying so that we can help each other and become an invaluable source for our leaders? Here's another leader, ancestor, Charles Spurgeon Johnson, who's a sociologist and college administrator, the first Black president of historically Black Fisk University, and a lifelong advocate for racial equality and the advancement of civil rights for African Americans and all ethnic minorities. Here we see the introduction of it's not just for African Americans, it's for all ethnic minorities. So he preferred to work collaboratively, it says, with liberal white groups in the South, quietly as a sideline activist to get practical results. Now, a sideline activist, what are your thoughts on that? How can that benefit us as a people? It says that his position is often contrasted with that of W.E. Du Bois, who was a powerful and militant advocate for Blacks and described Johnson as too conservative. Sideline activism. Let's talk about that in the Q&A. Now here's Wilbert Tatum. He was an American newspaper executive, an editor and a publisher. And I have him here because the media is so important. Back in the 1900s, early 2000s, the print paper was a viable way of getting information out to the community. The influence of the print paper is diminishing. And it begs the question, what are we doing as a people to replace ways in which we communicate in a mass meeting to our people about what's going on in our communities? Here's Wesley Pringle Sr., 1921 to 2005. He was a Black American born in South Carolina. He was a tenant farmer for many years living under the Jim Crow system. but he was quite successful in working that system. He had responsibility for growing crops such as cotton and corn. He wound up training many young farmers about the process and the science of farming. He must have been quite frugal because he was able to invest in properties and in farming. He owned property. In the system in which we live, ownership of properties is so important. And he shared his produce with the community. Of course, I'm going to ask the question, how do we prepare? As he was training young farmers, who are we training? Who do you have that you are grooming to carry on the work based in the philosophy, but maybe a different way, using different tools? Who are you grooming to continue the work of liberating Africans until all Africa is free? I'd like to stop for a minute here, Sister Ajua, and see if there are any questions in the Q&A. And then I'll go on to the second half.
Okay, wonderful. So as a reminder, everyone, if you have questions about the first part of the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box. There are 2 questions there that I will ask, but I'm going to ask everyone to give you all a minute or so. Think of some questions, some ideas, some thoughts, even just something that you want to share as part of the discussion. Please feel free to type that in the Q&A box so that we can get that read and see if there is a response to your comment. So if you have a question or a comment for this portion of the program, please put it in the Q&A box. And I am going to begin with our first question while others are coming in. It is from AJ, and AJ asks, it is interesting to learn that Africans were skilled in midwifery, ironwork, as well as rice cultivation, which you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. Could you tell us about other skills that Africans brought with them from Africa?
Maybe the sister wants to speak to that. She may be more knowledgeable of that than me at this particular time. Would she want to answer that?
Because this is a webinar.
It doesn't happen.
Right. So this isn't our normal meeting where you can interact via voice. So everyone is communicating via the chat or the Q&A box.
Okay. Repeat her question, please.
Yes. Could you tell us about other skills that Africans brought with them from Africa?
I think basically one of the, certainly community organizing and being able to lead, being able to lead an organization, being able to lead a tribe, being able to lead a family, that certainly is a skill that the community brought with them. Certainly they brought spiritual gifts of understanding how the universe works and how that works certainly in farming, as they would have brought with them. I don't know if that answers the question. Hello?
Okay. Well, if you have more to add, we can definitely come back to that question.
Okay.
And they also had a second question. To your point about women fighting in the Angola Liberation Army, she writes that she learned of Field Marshal Karima, who fought with her child strapped to her back. Is she included in your book?
No. Field Marshal Karima is not included in this book.
Okay. Then Brother Todd notes that he has several degrees and studied in various areas such as English, communications, sociology, and psychology, and has a master's in and specializes in psychology and sociology. And he wants to know, how can he help educate our people on their ancient history?
I think, Sister Ajua, I would encourage the brother to connect with IKG Wisdom Wednesday team with Dr. Anthony Browder and Sister Atlantis there. I think that's one approach. I think you may also want to look at the community in which you live and start there. Sister Ajua, would you have a response that you would like to add to that?
Not necessarily, but what I can share with IKG. Yes, we do have various programs where we like to share information. I think today with technology, there are multiple ways to also engage new communities and new audiences, whether it's creating your own videos and sharing those videos, creating opportunities even for youth to learn some of this history and having some fun, engaging kind of ways for kids to begin to learn this information. I'm not exactly sure, Brother Todd, who your audience or what audience you're looking for. But there are definitely, I think, quite a few ways that we can get information out. Everyone has their own way. And Claudette, Sister Claudette, one of the things that you're sharing with us is how people are utilizing or sharing information and making an impact through their expertise, through their skills, through their talents, despite what field or area they may be a part of. So you mentioned Catherine Dunham, a dancer, who was also an anthropologist. And that reminded me of Zora Neale Hurston, who was a writer, but also an anthropologist, and who used her work and her writings to share a better understanding about, let's say, for example, Haitian Vodun. So there are definitely a plethora of ways. And what I will do now, Todd says thank you. We can go on to our next part 2. And again, as you're completing part 2, everyone, if you have questions, please type them in the Q&A box and we will get them answered at the end.
There are some responses in the chat that I may read.
Absolutely. Feel free.
I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. AJ says that animal husbandry, poultry, goat and sheep and cattle farming, Sister Margaret said that she started activism at the age of 13 and studied with the great Catherine Dunham and several other activists. As young artists, Miss Dunham implored us to go out into the world and transform it. Art, activism, and education inform my life's work. Thank you for sharing that. There's another one here that says, Cutty from Guyana led a rebellion which almost conquered the Dutch, but was conquered internally. And we know how these rebellions go. The best laid ones succeed at certain levels, but frequently they are outmaneuvered. That doesn't stop. That doesn't stop our ancestors and our people today from resisting and building for the liberation of our people. Thank you all for that. Thank you. Okay, Sister Ajua, we're moving on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Here are some other works. All right, so what I'm lifting up is Brother James Cone, who was the founder of Black liberation theology. You know, he was an ordained minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And he had to come to terms, he said, with finding a spiritual, a mix or explanation. He says, Malcolm X proclaimed that Christianity is a white man's religion, and that Blacks should adopt an understanding of God that is out of their own history and experience. You know, he said he railed against the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus and a belief in delayed. For me, the burning theological question was, how can I reconcile Christianity and Black power? And so he created the nonviolence approach of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And so he created what he's called a liberation theology, right? So it explains, it brings together, it talks, you know, Jesus is not blue-haired and blonde-haired and blue-eyed, as we all know. And so he expounds on all of that. And he is taught at the Union Theological Seminary in New York and has influenced many, many candidates going through the schools who wind up teaching the gospel and teaching Christianity to people in churches and outside of the churches. Brother James Cone. Let me see if I have here, 1938 to 2018. The next person is Cyril Lionel Robert James, known as CLR James, 1901 to 1989. And here we're looking at some of our scholars and presenters of philosophies and praxis for us to think about. He was born in Trinidad and Tobago. It says here, to parents who were one generation removed from emancipation. He grew up in Trinidad, and he later went to Britain, came to the United States, and he also went to West Africa. And in those movements, it created his impression of the world. You know, he thought, here's what it says, in the post-independence period, CLR James took a stock of the various contradictions and competitions and antagonisms that circulated in social life in the West Indies. And he suggested that efforts to induce modernization were short-sighted. This put him in conflict with the post-independence political class, whose budding radicalism was tempered and redirected into cultural nationalism. Emancipation, he thought, could best be achieved through a social reconstruction of the way people relate to one another. Much needed, he thought, if one were to escape the problems of nationality. And we can see that now in the Caribbean. You know, you're a Bajan or a Jamaican or a St. Vincent. And so that nationality, those isms about us really mask the real root of the problems that is similar to all of us. So in that regard, I think CLR James was on the money and is credited of one of our ancestors who posited a way for us to examine how we ought to be moving forward as Africans. Now, here's something I want to share with you. It's called the Port Royal experiment of 1861. The Port Royal experiment was a program that was begun during the American Civil War, in which former enslaved Africans successfully worked on the land abandoned by planters. In 1861, the Union captured the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina and the main harbor, Port Royal. Interestingly, there is a city in Jamaica that's also called Port Royal, has a different history. The white residents fled, leaving behind 10,000 enslaved Africans. Several private Northern charity organizations stepped in to help the former enslaved Africans become self-sufficient. The result was a model of the reconstruction, of what reconstruction could have been. The African Americans demonstrated their ability to work the land efficiently and live independently of white control. They assigned themselves daily tasks for cotton growing and spent their extra time cultivating their crops, fishing, and selling their surplus crops. The locals acquired small amounts of property as a result. This one was new to me. I was not aware of this. And so I don't know if I'm the only one who didn't know about this, but I'm thankful I learned about it because it shows that we do the work. It shows that we can work together and that we can acquire property and build. There's a history of that certainly in the diaspora. Here is Leopold Sédar Senghor, 1906 to 2001. We identify him as a poet, a politician, a cultural theorist, was the first president of the Republic of Senegal. And ideologically, and I'm hoping we can have a conversation at some point, ideologically, he's an African socialist, the major theoretician about negritude, which is a literary and an ideological movement led by French-speaking Black writers and intellectuals from France's colonies in Africa and in the Caribbean in the 1930s. So if you live in an English-speaking colony or former colony, it's not likely that you would have learned that there were Black writers and intellectuals who were French-speaking, who had some ideas and some theories about how to get us out of enslavement. And so Senghor was one such on the continent. And here's something to ponder. Emotion is Negro, just as reason is Hellenic, Senghor said, right? Emotion is African, just as reason is Greek. Emotion is the intuitive reason in opposition to the European definition of reason, the discursive one. What are your thoughts on that? He thinks that we should assimilate, but not be assimilated. What are your thoughts on that? He thinks the civilization of the universe as a theory, about a theory of openness, of giving and receiving. He thinks that mixing of the Negro side and the Hellenic part would lead to what he would call, in quote, a new Negro. What would that look like? Is that something that's being practiced? Can you think of ways in which this has worked or not? Senghor, one of our scholars. And here we have Garveyism or Pan-Africanism. I'd like you to think a little bit about some of these things here. The Universal Negro Improvement Association advocates the uniting and blending of all Negroes into one strong, healthy race. It is against miscegenation and race suicide. Now, this organization was founded in 1914 by Marcus Garvey and by Amy Amy Ashwood, who later became Amy Ashwood Garvey. And these were written in the mid 1900s. Is this still relevant? Is this still a way for us to proceed as we work to liberate ourselves and our people from the oppressions and injustices we still face? It goes on to say, the UNIA believes in the social and political, physical separation of all peoples to the extent that they promote their own ideals and civilization with the privilege of trading and doing business with each other. Do you see that as something that's viable? 21st century, is that a viable approach to liberating ourselves and our people? I'd like you to put some answers in the Q&A, please. Are you still there? Is anyone in there? Adjua, Sister Adjua, is anybody there?
We are all here. We are all here.
But
I know it's very different with the webinar because again, you don't see anyone nor do you hear anyone. So again, they're putting questions in the Q&A and people are responding via chat. So I know it's difficult to look at your notes and refer to the chat, but people are here.
Would you read some of those responses, please?
Sure. Well, there is a question from Indra.
Yes.
She asked, does your book carry information on Sandy Ground of Staten Island, New York?
No.
The oldest continuously inhabited free Black settlement in the United States. She shares that they harvested clams, strawberry crops, and they participated in quilting. And do you have any, and you said no to that. Do you have any information?
May I say something? I want to thank, is it a sister for sharing
Indra.
that, Indra. I want to thank you for sharing that information. No, it's not in this book. You know, there's so many things that are not in this book. There are only 366, a little less than 366 ancestors that I lifted up coming out of the African continent, coming out of all of the West where Africans were brought. There are thousands of them, thousands of our ancestors who have done fantastic work. And not everyone made it into 366. So I hope you won't hold it against me or the vision that I had or the message that I got to put this work together. It is a beginning, and certainly there's opportunity. There are opportunities to build another maybe 366 or 350 that you may want to undertake. Take a look at what's in 366, look at what you think you would want to add and create something on your own. There are so many opportunities for us to do that. Yeah.
Yes, she also mentioned some other settlements such as Weeksville in Brooklyn and Seneca Village. So
Yes.
that would definitely be a great project to learn about
Yes.
different Black settlements throughout the US.
Yes.
Will Mahu asked if you can speak about the connection between W.E.B. Du Bois and Senghor.
I would like to do that, but I'm not in a position to speak about that connection.
Okay, so that, let's see what we have in the chat. So right now, everyone is just letting you know that they are here. They're enjoying the presentation. So I think it's a good place to keep going. Yep, they are here, so.
Okay. Well, I'd like to share with about another ancestor by the name of Kweku, who came out of the Gold Coast. right? Who was taken to Antigua. In 1978, Kwaku planned to rid the island of all oppressors, to abolish slavery, and to make the island of Antigua an African state. After figuring out a great way to execute his plan, he shared details with several like-minded enslaved Africans who helped him develop his plan. How long do you think they took to plan this? The strategy took 8 years of planning. It was well designed, and more than 10 huge plantations were the target. During an Akan ceremony at one of the planning meetings, Kwaku was initiated as king of the Black community. Anybody wants to guess what happened with this? The plan was leaked to several slave masters by enslaved Africans who stayed anonymous, it says. The ball was postponed, and Kwaku and several of his allies were captured and executed. Had the plan been successful, the Antigua's disputed slave conspiracy of 1736, as it is popularly known, would have possibly sparked the beginning of African rule outside of the African continent. So I think one I want to, if you're not getting here, is that our people fought on several levels. Here is Cyril Valentine Biggs, was a writer and a communist political activist. He was the founder and editor of The Crusader, a New York magazine in the New Negro movement of the 1920s, and founder of the African Blood Brotherhood, a small but historically important radical organization dedicated to advancing the cause of Pan-Africanism. And so we see, during the mid-1900s, there was that growing movement of people who thought communism, a social approach to improving on the injustices against Africans was the way to go. And there were those who wanted to go with a more capitalist approach. But whatever camp they were in, at the heart of it, they wanted to liberate our people. And I think that the goal is for the liberation of our people. The method, the route to get there is what's been maybe at dispute at some point in our history. I want to lift up another person here. Cordy Tyndall Vivian, also known as the Reverend C.T. Vivian, was an American minister, author, organizer, and a close friend and lieutenant of Martin Luther King Jr. during the Civil Rights Movement. He participated in 1947. He participated in his first non-violent action to end segregation at lunch counters in Peoria. Because of his strong religious upbringing and beliefs, Vivian said he was called to life in the ministry. He saw no separation between civil rights, faith, and ministry because racism is a moral issue, he said. They founded the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference, an affiliate of the Southern Leadership Conference that organized and trained students to embark on a movement to end segregation in Nashville. And you can read more about these people in, I have Patrice Emery Lumumba here listed. He played a significant role in the transformation of the Congo from a colony of Belgium into an independent republic. He served as the first prime minister of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Says ideologically, he was an African nationalist and Pan-Africanist. I want to lift up a sister by the name of Helen Marshall. Helen Marshall was an African-American politician from New York City, who was the first African-American borough president of Queens, New York. She brought to the fore concerns of her community that was predominantly African, East Elmhurst and Corona. She served 3 terms and influenced the healthcare, education, housing in the borough of Queens. Oh, here is one of my favorite people, Bruce McMarion Wright. He was born in 1917 and he transitioned in 2005. He was an American jurist who served on the New York State Supreme Court. I have here that he was a maverick, called Turn 'em Loose Bruce by his detractors, but he was affectionately called that way by those who understood the inherent racism in the US justice system. Judge Bruce Wright used his position in New York City's criminal court to right the wrongs of the system against Africans and the poor whose cases came to his courtroom. His book, Black Robes, White Justice, published in 1978, is a must-read, I think. We have a couple more questions in the chat, in the Q&A,
Yes.
sister.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Go ahead.
Lancelot shares, Garveyism is a practical approach for its time, but I believe that the modern political environment produces conflicts that challenges Garveyism. The answer is complex and may take years to be a force for us. I believe our freedom is unfolding in a different way than the older Garvey model. Any thoughts on that?
That certainly is an interesting take on that approach. And maybe it's a forum that we could get together to have that conversation and flesh that out, because there are people in the world who still believe in Garveyism and go that route. And there are people who have shifted their thinking.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Lance.
Thank you. Benin shares and asks, thank you for an excellent presentation. Do you know about the women of African descent who are midwives in Ecuador? I saw a documentary about how their skills are comparable to obstetricians. The women's knowledge and skills are traceable to the arrival of the first Africans brought to the region.
Wow, this is powerful. Benin, thank you for this information. No, I am not familiar with the works of the midwives in Ecuador. There's just so much information. There's a wealth of information out there. Thank you for sharing that. I learned something today from you. Thank you. Is there anything else, sister?
Those were the 2 that we had that came in so far. So you can continue and I'll let you know when some more pops up. Okay.
Let me see. I can bring up, there's another writer, Marvel Johnson Cook, C-O-O-K-E, who was the pioneering journalist and a civil rights activist who worked at a Main Street white-owned newspaper. And this begs the question, if you are an activist, if you are a Pan-Africanist, and you're working in a white-owned institution, how do you tread those waters? How do you live out what you believe while working for the establishment? And you can put that in the chat if you'd like. Harriet Vida Sims Moore, M-O-O-R-E, was an American educator and civil rights worker. She was the wife of Henry T. Moore, who founded the first branch of the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Henrietta and Harry were murdered. It is believed that they were assassinated during the civil rights movement because of their activism. She taught elementary school for many years in Brevard County in Florida. And I can imagine that she was teaching the children about their rich African legacy. I lift up here the founders of the historically Black colleges and universities, giving thanks to them as our ancestors, because they are institutions of higher education in the United States that were established before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with the intention of primarily serving the African American community. Most of those institutions were founded in the years after the American Civil War and are concentrated in the Southern United States. And so we lift up the visionaries and the people with the finances and the educators who founded these great institutions that continue to teach and educate our children. I have Ruby D. Williams here. You know, Ruby D. was an actress and a poet, a playwright, a screenwriter, a journalist, as a part of one of the ancestors who encourage us through their art. You know, the art form is so important to our lives. And Ruby D. was one of those who worked to make that happen. Sojourner Truth is here in the book, and so is Emmett Till. And I have Tally Beatty, B-E-A-T-T-Y, was a dancer and choreographer extraordinaire who was born in Louisiana. He left an indelible impact in dance and choreography as his work artistically spoke to the entrenched racial practices that are part of the American way of life. And so even though you go to the theater, even though we go and we're enjoying the talent and the gifts of the dancers and the actors, they're telling a story, and they have a role to play in that too. Here's an economist. What role does the economist play in helping us to uplift ourselves from things that seek to keep us unuplifted? Robert Clifton Weaver, W-E-A-V-E-R, was an American economist, academic, and political administrator. He served as the first United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development from 1966 to 1968, when the department was newly established by President Lyndon B. Johnson. He was the first African American to be appointed to a US cabinet level position. He directed federal programs during the administration of the New Deal, and at the same time completing his doctorate in economics in 1934 at Harvard.
So, Sister Claudette, someone
Yes.
asked, where
Yes.
can they purchase your book? Someone asked about getting your book. Where can they get it from?
The book is available on Amazon.com. And thank you for asking.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
There aren't any questions, but there is a comment from Doris, who shares that she believes that social and political physical separation is a viable option for some. The separation will have to include only those who already know that it is the path to true liberation.
Repeat that, please.
Yeah, she was saying that the separation is a viable option for some, especially those who know it's a path for true liberation. Those were some of her thoughts.
I think it's a conversation that needs to be had, like a public conversation that needs to be guided and had if we want to move have some form or fashion of moving forward as a collective.
Okay. Michael has a question. Michael asks, how would you suggest that one who is new to, I guess, learning the history of the ancestors, well, not the history of the ancestors, but new to accessing the spirit and power of the ancestors, what would you suggest to them?
Wow. That's a very good question. Is that Michael?
Yes.
It's making me think about my own journey. And everybody's journey is a little different, Michael. Because I was born in Jamaica in the Caribbean. And my family, my mother, we emigrated here at a time when I didn't know that I was Black or African for that matter. And in my journeys here, there are a couple of watershed moments for me. I was at the university and I took classes from the African Studies department. That those programs were newly introduced into the universities and colleges here through the African Heritage Studies Association. So when I took courses through the African Heritage Studies, through the African Studies department, they began to open my eyes. I began to connect with what I was learning. I also did political science at the college level, and I had a professor out of Africa, Professor Wentworth Afuete Kojo. While he was a political scientist, I believe he was also a Pan-Africanist. And so the influence between political science and African studies began to open my eyes and my heart. I also took a trip to Ghana with a group of college students while I was still a college student. And that opened my eyes and my heart some more. At the time, I was also a member of a mainline denomination Christian church where the pastor was African-centered. It was the first time I heard someone say that Jesus was not white and that indeed Jesus was African. And so those things started to open my eyes. And some clergy, Black clergy, took me, for example, to see Cornel West, a Cornel West lecture, and that opened my, and so and as I connected with other Africans and started to read more, that began to change my outlook of myself, one, to give me a sense of my cultural identity, and I don't know if that's helpful. There was a time when I had surgery and I was laid up for almost 2 years. And there were friends who brought me books, Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and I read a lot. I don't know if that's helpful, Michael.
Yes, Michael shares that was very helpful. There's another question from Will. Will has two questions. The first, is there information on the Garifuna women in Honduras? He understands that they originated from St. Vincent. That's the first question.
I have some idea about the Garifuna women but I'm not familiar. I don't have strong familiarity with them. They're not in the book. There's work to be done, Will. Will, I would encourage you to go on and do the work. There's enough out there for us, for each one of us on this call tonight, to do some work and not overlap.
Okay, and well, to that point, then the other question, do you have any information on the East African colonial resistance of Ethiopia?
Wow, these are powerful and insightful questions. Will, you're on it. I am charging you to take that and run with it and bring that back to us so we all can be better informed about some of the things that our brothers and sisters are doing in different parts of the world.
So I will kind of follow up on Will and ask a question. You were sharing about your inspiration for writing this book and it being a call from the ancestors, a mission, or yes, a mission from the ancestors to complete this book. As you completed the book, what 366, said 300 different people that you wrote about, so that's a plethora of folks. But is there anyone that you were surprised to learn about? You would like to speak on?
Several. Several. And many of them were more out of the African American USA experience. Because I'd done political science, I was familiar with quite a number of the freedom fighters on the African continent, right? But for many of the freedom fighters in the US of A, and then even the freedom fighters coming out of some of the other Caribbean nation states. So I knew about some people in Jamaica, and I knew about some people in Haiti, but Nevis and Barbados, I really didn't know. So I learned a lot in working and putting this together.
Is there a person that you can share with us that surprised you, and what was surprising to you about what you learned? You must say, I know there's so much. I know, like, well, there's 300, so I'm sure that there's so many. Because as you mentioned, there's so much to learn. Just curious if there were some information.
I don't know if any one person jumped out at me. I think I was more surprised to learn, if you would say, about the slave revolts that was at the beginning of the presentation, like in Nevis, certainly in Brazil, but no one name really jumps out at me. I'm sorry to disappoint you that way.
Oh, no disappointment, just curious.
Yeah. Dr. Ben is in this body of work. Emil Cabral is in this body of work. I learned a little bit more about him. Langston Hughes is in this body of work. Of course, somebody mentioned Zora Neale Hurston. She is in here. So is James Baldwin and James Brown and Ahmed Sekou Toure. Maybe I learned more about them as opposed to being surprised to learn of them. Maybe I just learned a little bit more about their background.
So another question, can you speak on ancestor veneration in the context of using African spirituality to achieve our true freedom? And this is coming from Michael. So, and I think within the lens of true freedom, perhaps within the realm of some of those rebellions and other means or revolts, or other really means of fighting back, how African spirituality was used. Can you speak to your thoughts on that?
You know, Michael, when I look at the history books that talk about how Nanny of the Maroons in Jamaica was able to fight off those Europeans, and that she called upon her spirituality to help to make that happen. I don't think she knew anything about Christianity. I think she was calling upon the spirituality that she brought, that they brought with them across the Atlantic.
Okay, so Michael wants me to clarify his question. Do you believe in ancestor worship or veneration in the context of using African spirituality to achieve our true freedom?
Okay, Michael, here is where I am. I grew up in a society that was predominantly Christian, right? And so I have this Christianity piece of me with which I am growing, right? I attend a Christian church. I am open to the teachings of Jesus. Knowing that he's not white or wasn't white helps quite a bit. But there comes, and I'm growing in my understanding. To do this was so heavy on my heart. I knew it had to be my ancestors because these people are all gone in the flesh. And so these are African folks. I cannot say without a doubt that it is the African presence. There's a part of me that thinks that spirituality is spirituality. It just is. And I'm growing with it, Michael. I do not have a definitive response for you at this time. Am I answering your question?
Let's see.
I have been studying. I'm a student of the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University, and their teachings about spirituality and the soul, and I am growing and trying to figure it all out at this time.
Yes, thank you.
Are you there, Michael?
Oh, he said thank you, yes. So Ms. Claudette, we are winding down towards the end. So I know you had a few more slides. I wanted you to be able to get to them before we close out.
Let me see what I have here. Thank you, sister, for your help. Let's see what I have here. Oh, what I have here is actually the last of the prepared slides. Can you see that?
Yes, I can. So everyone, if we thank you all for joining us this evening. If you would like to make any donations to our presenter for sharing her time, please feel free to make any donations via PayPal. And her PayPal email is on the slide there. Also, you'll see the titles of her books, which are all available on Amazon.com. And a percentage of all sales for the rest of the month of November will be contributed to the Asa Restoration Project. And we also, as you can see, her website is also listed on the slide. I want to also invite everyone out to our next Wisdom Wednesday presentation, which will take place on Wednesday, December 15th. And it'll be featuring Brother Eze Okoye, who will be speaking on recapturing our ancestral memory, the winter solstice in African medicine, magic, and meditation. And that will take place on Wednesday, December 15th. Again, you can go to IKG or ikgculturalresourcecenter.com to learn more about the various programs that we host, including the Wisdom Wednesday series, as well as our Egypt on the Potomac field trips. And before we officially and finally close out, I do want to send it back over to Sister Claudette for any closing remarks or any additional comments that you may want to make.
Well, Sister, I want to thank you for your assistance in making this presentation possible. I certainly want to thank all the participants who have joined us, and a special thank you to the ones who have stayed with us through this. Thank you for your questions. I come from the school of dialogue, and so this has been particularly challenging for me just to talk. but we did have some time for an exchange. So that is beautiful. I want to encourage you to purchase my work. It's good work. It's good food for thought. And from all the sales that are made through the end of November, I am giving a percentage to the Asa Restoration Project. And I'm going to encourage you also to think about engaging me to work with you on a professional development task around communications. How do you want to align your personal mission with the mission of wherever it is that you work, with your families, with your children? I'm good at doing that. And so I engage you to invite me to participate. I want to thank Dr. Anthony Browder. I want to thank Sister Atlantis Browder. And I want to thank Sister Jasmine Pitter, who introduced me to making this presentation possible. We did meet with Dr. Browder in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, when he came into New York to talk about the Asa Restoration Project. And that was so informative. Since that time, I had wanted to get to a Wisdom Wednesday, but I live far from DC. So thankfully, you've been able to create this platform for people like me who can't travel to DC every Wednesday to learn. That's what information, knowledge, and growth. That's what we are seeking to do. So I give thanks. I thank my parents and my ancestors. And as I continue to grow in love and light, may the good Lord bless you. I see Sister Michelle is still with us. Thank you, Sister Michelle, for being here. And I'm not sure I have anything else to say.
Wonderful.
At this point. If you have any questions or want to read anything in the chat.
Well, yes. So in the chat, people are just really saying thank you for this presentation. And so just lots and lots of thanks. Sacred, profound information, inspiring, wonderful. Again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us. And we definitely look forward to seeing you next month.
May I ask you a question, Sister